So now all the parts have been cleaned and prepped and ready for reassembly. There are a few more steps of cleaning to go as we put it back together. One thing I wanted to point out was there's lots of variations over the years of the production of these engines. One here is the difference in the armature sizes. You'll notice that the one on the left is a bit smaller than the one on the right. And of course the fields change size to go along with the change in the size of the armature. And also the notch in the chassis got longer to accommodate the longer field. So the chassis between the smaller motors and the larger motors are not interchangeable. There's lots of other variations as well, changes in the way the brush holders were designed. They all work basically the same, but they just look different. Some of them are even made out of plastic instead of the insulating paper. So now the trucks and motor is ready for reassembly. So I'm going to start by putting a drop of oil on the axle right where it passes through the chassis on all 4 locations. After that, we'll start putting grease on each of the worm gears. Being careful to make sure I get grease into each tooth on the gear. Now for the sake of time, I'm just going to show how to reassemble one motor. Of course, you repeat the same steps for assembling the second motor. The cord on the field is not very long, so you have to get everything kind of close together here. So, looking at the chassis, the slot is to the left. The commutator sticks out to the right as you slide it through the field. And the wires of the field are also on the same side as the commutator. You can just drop the whole thing into the slot. And then double check to make sure that the bearing is centered between the holes that hold the bearing strap down. This one's a little off, there it is. And once you have that all centered up, then you can take the yoke and slide it down over the field and put the screws in that holds it in place. usually you will not be able to get the second screw in without loosening these two adjusting screws on the top. So what I recommend is, since these were set before we took it apart, to turn each one out a half a turn. That should loosen it enough to get these holes to line up. Get the second screw in. And then go back and turn these back in a half turn so that they're still set the way they were before it was disassembled. Now we can add a little bit more grease on the top side of the worm gear. Now, one thing you may find when you're putting the straps back in is that these holes are very easy to strip out. One way to correct that problem is to use a longer screw. So what I have here is a screw that's like the original length screw, and not very many threads to grab there. And the screw next to it that's just a turn or two longer is the type of screw that would be used to hold the cover on a smoke unit. That extra thread or two might be all you need to make it so that you have some way to hold your straps down correctly. And we'll see how lucky we get with the straps on this one. I'm going to put one screw in there and just turn it enough to have it catch a thread or two. And I'm going to put one on over on this side. Now I'm going to take the strap, slide it in there. Put a screw on the other side. Be careful not to over tighten. It does not take much to strip those out of there. Now on this one, not only does the strap have to go on there, but you also have to get the brushes in there as well. When you're doing this, you also want to take a close look at the wires where they attach to the brushes. It is fairly common for these to start to fall apart here and fray, and so you may have to unsolder it, strip back a little bit and get some good wire and solder it back on. This is probably the trickiest part of the assembly, is getting the strap and the brush bracket both in there at the same time. So I've got this side screw and bracket in, but no screw on this side yet. So what I'm going to do is, I have a little tool that I just stick in the hole and it keeps everything lined up on that side while I tighten the screw on the other side. And once that screw's tight, I can take this out. It shouldn't move if I'm careful. Drop the screw in on this side. And I'm just going to put the springs back in position on the brushes. By the way, that train whistle you heard is my phone, and that is the authentic 4449 whistle, a recording I made while I was in the cab on a trip. Now when you put this back in to this yoke, all the wiring and the brushes are toward the center of the main chassis. But before I do that, I'm going to squirt a little bit of oil on the armature where the bearing sits on it, on both ends, since we haven't oiled those up yet. Then we can put the covers on to keep dust out. So that chassis should be ready to go. I'm going to do the same to the other chassis off camera, and then we'll finish the assembly. So now I've finished the reassembly on the second motor. I've also serviced the reverse unit. If you need more information on servicing reverse units, check out my other videos on my YouTube channel. It's shown in more detail on my steam engine servicing videos, part 2, and I eventually will take an excerpt from that part 2 and make a separate video of it just on the reverse unit. So now that it's all reassembled on each chassis, they can just be snapped back in to the main chassis. And it is ready to hit the test stand and see what we've got. Now I'm switching over to handheld mode here. I've got the assembly on my test stand. I'm going to put a little power to it, see how it goes. Looks like both motors are running very well.